अब कोर्स 7 का थोड़ा सा इंट्रोडक्शन दे देना, कोर्स
जी
7 का
जी
फर्स्ट।
जी जी
ठीक है, ओके
ओके,
ओके,
I'll do that.
स्टार्ट।
Yeah. So, good evening, learners. I hope you are keeping safe at these crucial times that we are facing. And let us pray for all those who are getting infected. So, beginning with today's counseling session, today we are beginning with course MST 017, that is about challenges to sustainable development. So, in this course, as we have studied in other courses, different aspects of sustainability and ecosystem, natural resources, tools, strategies, all those we have studied. But in this block, particularly, we are talking about more so about the challenges that we have towards sustainability as a whole, and in particular sustainable development. So there are four blocks in it. It's all about the challenges related to climate change, challenges related to other environmental issues, challenges particularly in the wake up of human health, and different type of diseases that we have, and so on. So in this block today we are beginning with block 1 of this course, that specifically talks about the climate change. What is climate change, the science of climate change, adaptation, mitigation, what are the international debates and discussions regarding the climate change. So all these topics we will be covering under this thing. So today in my session, I'm just covering about the climate change as a whole, as a phenomena, and what are the consequences of the climate change? Why does it all occur? And why, in a wake up of the sustainable development, why do we consider climate change is one of the biggest threats? And another important thing is that few decades before, few years before, we thought that climate change will occur, climate change will lead to so many problems. But the condition today is that climate change has already arrived. We now feel the consequences of climate change occurring in our ecosystems, the natural disasters taking place, and so on. So, climate change is real, it is an emergency, it is already here, and we need to tackle some steps, we need to take up certain things, we need to modify our agricultural practices, we need to modify our energy use, we need to make so many type of changes in our lifestyles also. So in a way, we will be discussing about all these issues. So let us now begin with today's counseling session. uh, we are talking about climate change. I don't know why. um, so what is climate change? If we talk about it, climate change according to IPCC, that is the nodal
फुल
body.
फुल स्क्रीन मैडम,
uh,
प्लीज फुल स्क्रीन।
that is a nodal body which studies climate change, and according to this, it is any change in climate over time. And learners, you must be knowing that what changes takes place in climate. There may be changes in the meteorology, temperature, humidity, precipitation. So these type of changes, when they take place over a long period of time, maybe because of the natural activities or as a result of human activity. According to IPCC 2001, this is the climate change. Then again, United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, it clearly states that climate change is attributed directly or indirectly because of human activities, and which alters the composition of the global atmosphere. So both the definitions, the major landmark definitions about the climate change, point specifically to one of the important ingredient, you can say one of the major factor, that is human activity. We have seen climate change occurring since ice ages. There are natural causes of climate change which occur because of the rotation of the earth, changes taking place in that, because of solar radiations, changes taking place, because of tilt of the earth's axis, but more so it is pronounced today because of human induced climate change that the earth is witnessing today. And another important term is global warming and climate change. Both these terms are used interchangeably. Many people confuse global warming with climate change, and for many it means the same thing. However, as a student of sustainability science, we must clearly distinguish between what is climate change and what is global warming. However, it appears to be the same for many. You must understand it very clearly that climate change is the change which has occurred. The change in the rainfall pattern, the change in the weather conditions, the change in the landscape, the change in the water flow of the rivers taking place. So it particularly talks about the changes taking place in the climate, and these changes are being extended, are being lasting for an extended period of time. On the other hand, global warming refers to change in climate, particularly it is referring to increase in the temperature, the rise in the temperature of the earth's atmosphere, particularly the lower atmosphere. When the temperature rises, that particular phenomena is called global warming. Now, global warming is caused by an entirely different set of factors as we compare it with the climate change. So, in when you analyze deeply, you will find that rise in temperature may be because of the increased or pronounced effect of the greenhouse effect, whereas climate change conditions may be occurring because taking global warming as one of the factor of climate change, but along with this there are other factors also responsible for the climate change which is taking place. So we will see what is the science of the climate change and how different phenomena which appear to be very similar. We think that global warming, greenhouse effect, climate change, ozone depletion, these are the some of the common problems which come to us before us, and we think that they are one and the same. But however, it is not so. So first of all, whenever we are beginning with the block on the climate change, and in other sessions we will be talking about the weather extremes taking place and what mitigation adaptation techniques. First of all, these terms should be very, very clear in your minds, that what distinguishes one from the other. So, what is global warming? The causes of global warming. What is climate change? Causes of climate change. And then what is greenhouse effect? So, greenhouse effect, you must be very familiar with this term. You must have read about it. You must also be knowing about it. So greenhouse effect is a natural process. The radiations come from the sun. Many are reflected back, but there are certain gases in the atmosphere, which is the envelope surrounding the earth. And in this envelope or in this atmosphere, there are certain gases. And what they do is that whenever the radiations are being reflected back, they re-radiate them back to the surface of the earth. They do not allow those radiations to go back. They do this job, and because of this, what is happening? The temperature of the earth is maintained at a livable temperature, you can see. Had the greenhouse effect not been there, the temperature of the earth would have been very, very low, because most of the radiations from the sun which are coming, they just get reflected. So there is no warming, there is no heating of the earth taking place. And in the absence of the greenhouse effect, the temperature, the scientists have predicted that the temperature would be around minus 18 degrees Celsius of the earth. So it would not have been possible for any life form to exist. So we perceive greenhouse effect with as a negative perception, thinking that greenhouse effect is something which is bad for the environment and bad for us. But however, this natural process which warms the earth's surface is very much essential for maintaining various life processes which are taking place on this earth. So I just read it out here, that it is a natural process that warms the Earth's surface. When the sun's energy reaches the Earth's atmosphere, some of it is reflected back to the space and the rest is absorbed and re-radiated by the greenhouse gases. This absorbed energy warms the atmosphere, and the temperature of the Earth is maintained at a optimum level. Otherwise, life wouldn't have been possibly. Now, to our curiosity, what are greenhouse gases? Because every gas doesn't have that property of re-radiating radiations back to the surface of the earth. So the prominent greenhouse gases are water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone, and fluorinated carbons. Ozone is the tropospheric ozone, the ozone which is present in the troposphere that acts as a greenhouse gas. Now, when you look at these gases, you can see, and if you're asked that what are the causes of the green, what is the reason behind warming of the earth taking place, you can very well see that how these gases, maybe increase in the concentration of these gases, is responsible for warming of the earth's atmosphere, and eventually it leads to enhanced greenhouse effect, and it alters the temperature of the earth, which is rising with every decade. So now if these two terms are clear, now let us talk about what is the science behind climate change. So how do we relate global warming or the greenhouse effect with the climate change? So for better understanding, we need to understand the carbon cycle. You must have known about the carbon cycle, hydrogen cycle, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, water cycle. These are some of the cycles which are operating in our ecosystems. So when we talk about the cycles, what does it mean? That, for example, if it is a carbon cycle, there is an element of carbon in our bodies, in the bodies of the plants, in the soil, in the water, in the air. The carbon is there. Now, this carbon moves from one level to another, from one organism to another, and this and that. So, this carbon cycle, in a way, we can say that there is a complex system which involves the biological world in the form of plants, shells, microbes, etc., and also the chemical and the physical processes in it. So there is an interaction of atmosphere because of carbon dioxide gas. In oceans, carbon dioxide is there, calcium carbonate is there. Soils contain carbon, vegetation, fossil fuels, storehouses of carbon. So because of this carbon cycle, now you can see, we say that fossil fuel burning is one of the causes of too much of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And too much of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere simply means that more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, more greenhouse gas, more re-radiation of the radiations back to the surface of the earth, and eventually rise in the temperature. So we need to understand this as the carbon, what we are talking just now. The main reservoirs of carbon are oceans. They contain huge carbon. Fossil fuels contain carbon, soils, vegetation, plants, forests, trees, they contain lot of carbon, and the atmosphere contains carbon. So how, when we want to say that because of increase in carbon emissions, the greenhouse effect is pronounced, so we can notice that there is a deforestation taking place. The trees are being cut down, so there are no storehouses of carbon left anymore. So carbon is more in the atmosphere. More burning of the fossil fuels taking place. The changes in the land use which has occurred, clearing of the forest for agriculture, for urbanization, for construction purposes. So for all these factors, by the way of the land use, we have also made it uh, release lot of carbon into the atmosphere. And more pronounced is that combustion of the fossil fuels, human activities, particularly they are responsible for more and more carbon emissions and carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So by this, how do we relate climate change? Is that how do we know that climate change is occurring? Because for a layman who does not study climatology or who does not study the concentration of carbon molecules into the atmosphere and who does not study about the changes in the temperature taking place, we still feel that the climate change is taking place because globally we have seen, we are witnessing that with every decade, the temperatures are rising. There's a global temperature rise which has occurred, which we term up as global warming. There is a warming up of oceans, which affects aquatic biota, which affects fisheries, which affects the breeding of aquatic organisms, which affects the coral reefs, that is the warming. Ice sheets are shrinking, glacial retreat taking place, decreased snow cover because most of the snow is getting melted. Early snow melt has been seen, has been researched, has been studied. Rise in the sea level is occurring. Extreme events taking place in the form of hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, forest fires, and so on, and acidification of the oceans taking place. So these are some of the consequences, you can say, these are the evidences by virtue of which we can say that the climate change is taking place. And again, we come back to the point that what are the causes, and we have seen that there are natural causes and the anthropogenic causes. Because naturally also, it is not so that the climate change is something which is happening for the first time in the history of the earth. It has taken place several decades, several millions of years ago also. There are natural causes of the climate change, like changes in the intensity of the sun and its radiations, volcanic eruptions taking place, and changes in the naturally occurring greenhouse gases which may have occurred in the past. But more so, we have seen by the various reports of IPCC, UNFCCC, and other scientific bodies, anthropogenic factors are the leading causes of Earth's rapidly changing climate, because there has been rapid increase in the temperatures from 1850, the industrial stage when it began, till today. We have seen that how temperatures have increased, the average temperature of the earth. So it is clear that because of anthropogenic factors, the earth's climate is changing rapidly. Because along with the changes taking place in the temperature, there has also been increase, corresponding increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and so on. So it is attributed because of the human activities, changes in the land use, burning of the fossil fuels, industrialization, human activities, and many others. So this we term it as enhanced greenhouse effect, because had the greenhouse effect been not there, the temperatures would have been very low. Had the greenhouse effect been at an optimum level, the temperatures and the living conditions of the earth would have been, you can say, favorable, livable. But today's are the times of enhanced greenhouse effect. More and more concentration and more addition of carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases being added into the atmosphere. And for this, several human activities are responsible, like burning of the fossil fuels, maybe for energy generation, maybe from automobiles, maybe by the industries. More and more fossil fuels are burned. Agriculture, changes in the agricultural practices, the way we practiced agriculture few years back and the way we practice agriculture today, coming up of monocultures, the plantations of that sort, or practicing modern agricultural techniques, usage of more and more fertilizers, pesticides, modern agricultural methods, and the type of the crop which we are growing, that also has a lot to do with the emissions taking place. So this is enhanced greenhouse effect, which is already adding up to the temperatures of the earth. And the current warming trend is particularly of more significance because most of it is due to result of human activity since the middle of the 20th century, and the rate of increase has been much higher as it was few decades before. So we have to look into this and we have to find out that what are the factors responsible, and we have to work out that how we can mitigate the effects of climate change taking place. So coming up to the point that we have seen till now, that so and so factors are explaining to us that what is the condition today. So likewise we have said that climate change is not future, it is high time, and we have already wasted so much of years and we have wasted so much of time being in the state of denial. We have always denied that climate change will not occur. Climate change is just something which is always has always occurred, and again it will occur. It is not going to be any different story than before. But now we must realize that climate change is not a thing of the future, but it is a thing of the present. So every year is hotter, it is breaking all records. Every time we see the records of temperatures in April, May, June, if we talk about India, the average temperatures, they are breaking records with every passing year. We can see how the rainfall patterns have been changed. We have seen in the past last year scorching bullfires, the locust attacks taking place. So along with this, there is also an increase in the frequency of the cyclones, melting of the glaciers, heat waves, cold waves. You know, these are some events which are very common, and these are the new normal, we can say, because extreme weather has become new normal today. It is very normal to see that yes, it rains in October. It is very normal to say yes, the temperatures are going above 45 degrees in many cities of India during summer months. So this is the new normal for us. So climate change is very much here. So till this point we have denied the occurrence of the climate change, but today it is high time that we must agree to the point that climate change is already arrived. Talking further, what are the extreme events? We have seen that climate, we very well say that extreme events are taking place. Extreme rainfall, extreme hot weathers, extreme cold weathers, extreme arid conditions happening in certain places. So these are some of the extreme events which are taking place. There is intense rainfall, long arid weather, drought-like conditions, storms, hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, coastal areas. Most of the time, such type of events are occurring. Heat waves in summers, cold waves in winters, intense snowfall taking place in the higher, you can say, Himalayan region and all, and forest fires during summer months. Very, very common stories and incidents that we find today. These are the extreme events which are taking place. So let us talk about these events individually one by one so that we have a more clarity of their relationship with climate change. For example, intense rainfall. We know that rainfall, flooding, these are some of the common events which, if we talk about India, most of the states during monsoon months, we experience this type of situation. And we know that precipitation patterns have been changed. Precipitation means any solid or liquid form which is coming from the, you can say, sky, which is coming from the upper atmospheres. So it is a general form of rainfall. It may be snowfall, that is also precipitation, and other form of frozen or liquid water falling from the clouds. Now today we find at certain places the rainfall has changed. What has changed is that now it rains for a very few number of days, but it rains heavily. The time of the rainy days, you can say, the number of rainy days have reduced. But in those rainy days, it just not rains, but it pours. So there is a change in the amount of rainfall, there is change in the intensity, frequency, and the type of the precipitation. So there some areas which are getting more rainfall, they are getting wetter. Still more rainfall is occurring at those places. And globally, if you find that flood is actually the most devastating of all the natural disasters which took place, because it takes a toll on the large number of people, of property damages. All this is attributed because of the intense rainfall, or in the other words we can say, because of the flood like situations which occur in most part of the country, and in the world also we find this thing. So today it does not rain, it pours. The number of rainy days has declined, but the intense rainfall occurs, like 10 centimeter to 50 centimeters of rainfall per day is happening. So what happens because of this? The groundwater recharge is not possible. We are not able to collect this water, and most of the water gets wasted. So more, that is what it means, that more water is pouring down in lesser duration of time. For For example, globally, 50% of the annual precipitation was received just in 11 days. And studies have shown that there is a rising trend in the frequency of heavy rain events and decrease in the moderate rain events over central India from 1951 to 2000. So it is also true, because earlier times we used to say that monsoon months are, you can say, August, September, these are the monsoon months, but now it is not so, because till September, till October, it is always raining, sometimes it is dry, sometimes it is very high temperatures continuing till September and October also. So this explains that the rainfall patterns have changed. Now you can very well relate that rainfall, India is a monsoon, Indian agriculture particularly is monsoon dependent. So I'm just talking about that how this climate change phenomena, one of the event, just take the example of the rainfall, forget about the aridity and other extreme events taking place. Just one parameter, you think about that how precipitation patterns, when they get changed because of this factor, then agriculture is impacted, other activities are also impacted. So this is how the grave situation is coming before us, because entirely different type of life cycle is there of plants, flowering plants, trees, animals, birds. So whole ecosystems is in peril because of one phenomena, that is the rainfall pattern. Now another important factor is arid conditions and drought. The places which are arid continue to experience aridity, continue to experience drought like conditions, because the prolonged arid weather, it creates desert like conditions at any given place. And what is drought? That means very high temperatures characterized by very low rainfall or very low, you can say, snowfall for a prolonged period of time. So when there is a warming taking place, there is more of evaporation, and these type of situation, when soil becomes very water deprived, it also further leads to loss of the productivity in those regions. So arid conditions may result into increased drought, means more number of, you can say, more spells of drought in those areas if the um, conditions prevail for a long period of time. Or it may be like expansion of the dry areas, which has generally been seen in many parts of the western Rajasthan particularly. You can say that there is an expansion of the desert areas, for more and more areas are particularly now experiencing desert like conditions, and this phenomena is desertification. So when we were discussing about land resources in our other courses, in other courses of the same program, we have discussed that how desertification and land degradation phenomena are related to climate change. So this way you can relate things, that how do they occur in the natural setting. So land degradation, desertification and climate change, many things are correlated, and how in the long term they affect the agricultural practices, and also have a socio-economic consequences in the long run. Then there are a number of other instances, by which we can say that how warmer temperatures are responsible for aridity. See, if the temperatures are high, they are high because of enhanced greenhouse effect. Now it makes the evaporation more from the soil, so there is less amount of soil moisture, and there are more low precipitation uh, spells in those areas. So it may be a positive feedback. You can say you must be knowing about the positive and the negative feedback. For example, positive feedback means when the soils are comparatively dry, there is no plant cover, so there is no mechanism, no transpiration, and no mechanism of increased water vapor in the atmosphere. So further rainfall gets reduced in those areas, because less amount of water vapor formation is taking place because of less green cover in that area. So again, there is also change in the soil moisture, also change in the atmospheric rivers. You know what are atmospheric rivers? There's this the high concentration of water vapor in certain patches in the atmosphere. So that also disrupt the precipitation patterns because of high temperatures, because it is not just the point of high temperatures, but again there is a very less humidity, very high winds, we can say heat waves taking place in those places, and therefore it alters the terrain and the geographical conditions in those regions. So that also needs to be taken care of. Why this thing, somebody's asked me what is positive feedback. Positive feedback relates to the phenomena where one factor or one change in the ecology brings about, leads to further occurring of the same phenomena. For example, you can say that deforestation serves as the positive feedback for increase in the temperature. So that means that aggregating the situation further, that is the positive feedback. Negative feedback, on the other hand, reverse, means it suppresses the activity, where it also, a kind of you can see a shield to occurrence of that particular phenomena. That is the negative feedback. So we can say that droughts are persisting through positive feedback, means conditions are created in such a manner, the conditions like less soil moisture, more aridity, high temperatures, less plant cover, low vegetation, and therefore again it is creating conditions like drought. So that whole cycle has become like a positive feedback. Okay. Then again, we are talking about the extreme events, and you must have read that storms, hurricanes, they're very common, and global warming particularly makes the hurricanes more intense, because warming and warmed oceans and warm seas, they also warm up the air in the surrounding areas, and therefore it has been noticed that strongest hurricanes produce more rainfall, because there is a temperature change taking place in between the land temperature and the water temperature. And because of this, nowadays they are very intense, very high frequency storms, hurricanes which have occurred. In every year you find another name for a cyclone, for a hurricane taking place in the Indian Ocean. And all these phenomena have been very, very commonly studied and very commonly seen also, and witnessed nowadays in the present day context of climate change taking place. Then, if we talk about India particularly, we have a region which is particularly, we say that uh, we live in a climate risk world, and we are more prone to natural disasters of different kinds, because we have mountains, we have plains, we have deserts, we have coastal belts, we have islands. So according to the studies made by different scientific bodies, it is said that India is among the 10 most affected countries in Global Climate Risk Index 2021. That means we are at risk if the climate change effects are pronounced, if the consequences of climate change may be seen in the form of changes in agriculture, occurrence of more disasters, occurrence of more extreme events. If all this is happening because of climate change, India is at number 10 risk. That means we need to take some measures. We have to be very careful. And around 250 extreme climate events were seen between 1970 to 2005, and then there have been 310 extreme weather events, and these extreme events contains floods which we see every year occurring, cyclones, forest fires taking place, and so on. For example, heat waves that was not put under disaster sometimes before, but now we categorically say that Lu or the heat waves during summer months, because they are also categorized as the natural disasters. So India is the fifth most vulnerable country globally in terms of extreme climate events, and it is also said to become the world's flood capital, because every year we face floods. Large areas of our villages, of our agricultural lands get flooded with waters. The reasons of flooding may be many, maybe intense rainfall, or maybe our improper land use, maybe urbanization, and That is entirely a different set of studies which need to be conducted, that why occurrence of floods is more pronounced and why urban flooding particularly occurs. So the major effects of changing rain and snow patterns are felt on agriculture, because we are an agricultural country. um, Agriculture is dependent upon rainfall, and rainfall is dependent upon the climate, and climate is continuously changing. So, in a way, we can say that agriculture is at a risk. Water supplies, ecosystems, forests, and over the years, all the world, the nations have suffered a lot because of extreme weather events taking place. While we talk about the climate change and we talk about the consequences, it is important for us to know that who are vulnerable, because you and me, when we live in urban areas, except for a few spells of hot weather or except few spells of rains taking place, we hardly find that climate change is a kind of any problem, because we have our mechanisms and we have our own safety cocoons, by virtue of which we hardly feel the effect of climate change taking place. But then there are certain groups of people whose livelihoods, whose living and existence and proper survival depends on a great deal upon the climate. And that makes us know and study about the vulnerability. So there may be biophysical and socio-economic vulnerability. A person who lives in mountainous regions which suffer landslides many often, which suffer snowfall many often, have the biophysical vulnerability. The people who live in the coastal areas, they are always at a risk of getting flooded or their houses, their livelihoods lost because of the place of their living. They are at a risk of biophysical vulnerability. But then there are socio-economic vulnerability, that is because of their position, the marginalized communities, the people who are disadvantaged, the indigenous communities, the minorities, who who are although they are treated, um, they have a kind of a tag of minority attached with them. And for example, because of climate change and natural disasters take place, they have to lose their land. They come to the urban areas after losing their livelihoods because of the climate change, or you can say they are the climate refugees. There will be by 2050, there will be 1 billion climate refugees, as it has been predicted by studies. So these refugees, when they come to urban areas, they they are at a more disadvantaged position, because being minority and being poor, so that group constitutes a socio-economic vulnerability. They are more vulnerable of climate change because of their position in the society, because of their livelihoods. So we must understand that who is vulnerable. Women are vulnerable, children are vulnerable, people living in the mountainous regions are vulnerable, people living in the coastal areas are vulnerable. And then they are vulnerable to what? They are vulnerable to losing lands, losing occupations, or getting poor, or losing their lives. So they are vulnerable to what kind of stimulus? Here we also have to see that vulnerable to what extreme weather event? Vulnerable to floods, vulnerable to aridity, which may prevail in that region for a very long period of time. And why they are vulnerable? That means they are vulnerable again because of their geography, because they are living at that place, or because of their position in the society. So these are different kinds of studies. When we'll study other sections of this particular course, we will be talking about all these vulnerability factors in detail, where we will discuss that how climate change and vulnerability, it has a socio-economics, because as a students of sustainability science, we are not just concerned about the ecological and the environmental effect of climate change, but more so we also want to explore that how climate change affects the livelihood, how climate change affects the status of the women in the society, How does it jeopardize the education of the children? So all these are very interesting things that we are going to explore in the lessons to come. So just again repeating the same, the geographical location of a particular community makes them more vulnerable. There are several tribes who live in the forest, and the forest fires, if they occur every time, they are at risk. There are people who live in the fishermen and who live in the coastal areas, they are at risk because of the incidences of coastal flooding taking place. Then age group also, it is very interesting to know that which age group is more vulnerable, because in the urban scenario climate change leads to increased heat waves, and so in that particular age group of the younger generation is more impacted than the age group of the senior citizens, because most of the time they are indoors. So like this also in the urban areas also, the geographical location and the age group matters a lot. Then we talked about the indigenous population, the people who live in the forest, the people who live in the mountainous regions, the people who have been long practicing agriculture and other means of livelihood. So how they are affected, the marginalized communities who depend on the natural resources, who depend on the forest for their day-to-day living, they are at risk more so, because first of all, their life, their livelihood, their survival is totally dependent upon those ecosystems, and these ecosystems are at risk because of climate change taking place. So therefore these communities have bear the greatest brunt of climate change and the consequences of the climate change in the long run. So, what is happening because of climate change? Briefly, we can discuss that warmer temperatures, sea level rise, and extreme weather. These are the three common, perceptions of climate change taking place. They damage property and infrastructure, power lines, railway lines. In the extreme cases, when the flooding takes place, human health and productivity is badly affected because of climate change. It presents an entirely interesting point of study that how our health is affected by climate change. It affects agriculture, forestry, fisheries, tourism, and demand for energy further increases, because it's a kind of a chicken egg kind of a story, that we need more ACs in summers because the temperatures are high, and if we continue to use more ACs, the temperatures will continue to remain high because of the release of CFCs. So this is a positive feedback what somebody was asking. So this is a kind of a circle which goes on. So we have to see that how we are able to meet our energy requirements also, because of the changes in the climate which are taking place. So, just let us discuss few points here, talking about human health, food security, employment, energy use, infrastructure, gender equality, and social system. For example, our health is affected by climate change, because in case of any events like flooding and extreme heat taking place, yes, there are emergencies, there are extreme events taking place, certain health issues, accidents taking place, but there are chronic illnesses also. Because of climate change, there are water shortages. So sanitation, cleanliness, that is affected again because of climate change. For example, the different types of cancers occur, different type of psychological stresses occurs when the people move from one place to another, because of changes in the agriculture taking place. So malnutrition also occurs many times. So climate change, and because of this is also, you must have read that because of climate change, the tropical countries, they will have more cases of the tropical diseases, particularly because the temperatures here become favorable for the growth of different vectors, different mosquitoes. So these are some of the health effects of climate change which we must understand. And there's a whole lot of study which has been done on this, and we need to look at women's health, look at children's health, look at elderly health. Different facets of health of human beings are affected um, because of changes taking place in not only in the temperatures, but also because of the allied factors coming up, like because of maybe displacement of the people when they move from one place to another. So health issues are there. Water shortages occur because of climate change, and women have to walk long distances to carry water. Women use polluting sources of energy for making food in the rural areas. So, in a nutshell, it also affects their health. Not only their health, but also agriculture. If you see, people are practicing agriculture where the water is scarce, where the soil is very infertile, so it requires more labor, and automatically it also affects the health of the farmers and other workers who are doing different jobs in these sectors. Then food security is affected because our food, it depends, not only food access, but food stability, the price stability particularly, and the usage of food, what kind of food we are eating, what kind of crops we are growing. This is also a factor of climate change, because somewhere the rains are occurring very much, at some places the rains are not at all occurring, somewhere the groundwater is extracted beyond a saturation level, but there are certain places where the groundwater is not at all used. I mean to say that groundwater is totally exhausted, so there some other methods of irrigation are being followed, where some other natural resources is being taken up. Dams are constructed for irrigation purposes, and these dams again take a toll on the ecology, environment, and socio-economic aspect. So these are, agriculture and climate change, they have a threefold relationship, because in one way we can say that climate change affects the agriculture. Yes, because rainfall, wind, temperature, all these parameters which are very crucial for agricultural practices, they are influenced by climate change. So the type of crops we are growing, the time of the season where we are growing, the flowering, fruiting, harvesting, seeding, all these agricultural practices are affected, are changed actually because of climate change, because the cropping season has changed, the flowering times have changed. That is another issue. And another issue is that agriculture also contributes to climate change, because methane, as you know, it is one of the important greenhouse gases. And in paddy cultivation particularly, the methane gas is released to a great extent. So agriculture also contributes to, we can see here that agriculture and climate change, yeah, here it's written that it has a threefold relationship, that agriculture contributes also. Climate change also leads to changes in the agricultural practices, and agriculture can also moderate climate change, because climate resilient agriculture, zero tillage farming, better crop selection, better seeds, high yielding varieties, proper irrigation methods, use of organic fertilizers, so many types of methods of agriculture practices which are sustainable in the long run can be employed so as to reduce the impact of the climate change. So I just read through it that availability of agricultural products is affected by climate change directly through impact on crop yield. Yes, crop pests, because more number of pests because of change in the climate. So pesticides need to be applied more. So these kind of diseases, loss of crops, failure of the crops also occur in winters. Most of the times when it rains more than usual, it also damages the crops. When there is a lot of frost like conditions occurring, in the long run, soil fertility, water holding capacity. So these are some of the agriculture related climate change which occur. We'll be studying about all these in detail when we will take up other blocks. So this is a climate resilient agriculture which strives to use sustainably the resources through better crop and livestock production system. So there is a long term higher productivity, and then employment, income, livelihoods, because we are dependent on climate for so many things. So our, it is one of the biggest threats to economic stability. There are market and non-market impacts. Market impacts relate to where transactions takes place. For example, uh, buying of seeds, changes required in energy production, where transactions are taking place. They are the market impacts. And non-market impacts of climate change are health of individuals, longevity of the individuals, ecosystems health in the long run. That is the non-market impacts. And because of flood damage, the infrastructure is lost and it needs to be rebuilt. That will come under the market economic impact of the climate change. So there are different types of economy also. It is a biggest threat because there are a lot of discussions and debates now that how economy and climate change are related to each other. Similarly, energy use, because climate change is likely to affect the amount of energy which we need to heat the buildings in the cold areas and also to cool down the buildings in the hot areas in summers particularly. So we need energy to do all this. We require energy. We have seen in winters is a common example. We need geysers, heaters, and in summers we need air conditioners to cool our homes and offices. So there is an increased demand for air conditioning also, that also suppresses the power plants. Similarly, infrastructure we need to build upon, looking into the present times where flooding is common, other disasters are common. We need to have proper infrastructure, proper transportation built up, so that we are able to meet the requirements of the people in both rural as well as the urban areas. Gender equality we will take up in some session in a detailed manner, because this is important field where we see that the climate change impact on gender are quite pronounced, because it is the women who carry out the domestic chores. They take up the responsibility of caregiving, caretaking. So in agriculture also, it is mostly the women who are performing the work, because males migrate to urban areas and the females are looking after the agricultural lands. So if agriculture is impacted by climate change, they bear the greatest load. So their burden increases when there is less water, when there is a harsh agricultural conditions, when there is a gathering of fuel wood, food, etc., becomes a tedious task for them, when there is a deforestation taking place, and particularly during natural disasters occurring, for example, earthquakes, floods, and all these scenario. It is very very important to see that how these type of risks particularly impact. So these are the gendered impacts, you can say, of climate change, which present a very interesting point of study. And these are socio-economic impacts like harassment, violence, certain type of crimes taking place against women, that also needs to be studied. That needs to be, looked into while we think of climate change as a holistic manner. There are social systems, because social disruption, instability, and conflicts also occur, because climate is linked to survival, to livelihood, and these are the social system. So we can say that mostly the agriculture, infrastructure, human well-being, productivity, tourism, the financial market, almost everything is affected by the climate change. So we must not forget that climate change is an externality. The emitter does not bear the cost. Who emits, which countries are emitting, they do not bear the cost of the release of the greenhouse gases. And it is a unique externality, because there is no time frame, and it also doesn't know the boundaries. So it is emitted at one place, but it goes on to some other places, different places. So it has a different kind of an approach in the form of global support, and cooperation is required to mitigate the impact of climate change. So we must conclude that it has a social impact. It's a reality. First of all, we must come out of the stage of the denial, and Indian agriculture is likely to suffer. We have to adapt proper technologies and strategies to minimize the negative impact. For this, we need research, funding, policy, and we must understand that cost of inaction will be much, because many times we say that costs are more, but in the long run the cost of inaction will be more, and particularly it will be in the form of the lives of the people, livelihoods of the people. Thank you. So if you have anything uh, to discuss, we can discuss now.